Hi, this is Mrs. Skelton and Mrs. Forson, and we are talking about oxygen and carbon cycles today.
And our ICANN statements are: we can identify the biotic and abiotic elements of the major biomes. We can describe how the biotic and abiotic elements within the biomes are connected. And then we're going to go back into the real world because, hey, we're in the real world. We're going to use thinking and modeling to explain the phenomena of our world.
We're going to start with a couple of diagrams here, and I want you to take just a second and take a look at those closely.
All right, guys, what can you tell me that you see between both of those diagrams?
So we're looking at things that are the same and things that may be different.
So, Mrs. Skelton, what I can tell you right now is in both of those diagrams right now, I see, some green plants.
Yep, I sure do. And I see some animal life, although one is a giraffe and the other one is a person, but those are animal life. And I think it's kind of inferred in the second picture, but I believe there's probably sunlight. It looks like it's daylight. So in the first picture with the atmosphere, it's pretty clear that that's supposed to be the sun.
Definitely. And probably again there it's inferred that it's a nice day because, in the one picture it's nice and bright and blue out, and the other picture it looks like you got some cumulus clouds up there in the sky, those big puffy cotton ball looking clouds. So it's a nice day. So let's really get into the root of this though, because we've done the surroundings and everything, but let's talk about those words and those arrows. What are we noticing as the similarities with the words and the arrows?
Well, I see a couple things that are the same. I see oxygen at the top of both of those diagrams, and I also have noticed that the words carbon dioxide are at the bottom of the diagram, but in between are different words, Mrs. Forson.
That's crazy, yeah. Well, I also see photosynthesis in there, Mrs. Skelton, as one of those things right there on the left. So does that mean only photosynthesis can be on the left-hand side of diagrams?
Well, that could be a little bit of a misconception, because I think that when I see that photosynthesis, when I'm looking at that, I see a tree. So I think the word photosynthesis would follow that tree wherever I put it on that diagram.
But I could also put photosynthesis down there in the grass. Can't put them on the organisms that I see, the animal organisms.
No, that wouldn't work. I do see the word respiration on the second diagram, but on the first one I see animals and plants breathe in oxygen.
Oh, so respiration must just be a fancy word for breathe.
I like that. Yeah, that makes sense to me. So respiration must be a fancy word to breathe. Oh, I get it now, Miss Forson. I see that the person breathes out carbon dioxide, and the giraffe breathes out carbon dioxide, and then it looks like the plants take in carbon dioxide.
Ooh, so they must breathe out oxygen. But that's not going to be really the case. Plants don't really breathe, they transpire.
I see. So I might, if I was drawing this, add the word transpire or transpiration over on the tree?
I think I would too. So in your notes, I would make a note, if you've drawn this diagram out, to write in the word transpiration near your plants. So near the leaves of the trees, near the grass on the ground. What if there was nice, cute little daisies all over? Could I put it by the daisies?
Absolutely, that's a plant. So I would definitely put transpiration by any flowers, any plants whatsoever that you put in there. So if you are a talented artist and you've got your azalea bush out there, you've got transpiration going on. So, but wait a second, I'm a little confused, Mrs. Forson. I'm looking at this diagram and I'm writing the word transpiration on there, but now what about photosynthesis?
Oh, I think photosynthesis, maybe just in the trees. No, I know. Photosynthesis is anything that deals with plants. Every plant goes through photosynthesis. So anything that is a green bearing plant, down to even if your flowers are white, they're photosynthesis, because you have to be able to have photosynthesis in the environment in order for your organisms to survive.
All right, so it's a plant. I've got photosynthesis, and I've also got transpiration. Easy for me to say. Great, great. I also have transpiration and photosynthesis because I have plants. So now I see that something is really cyclical going on here, and that is oxygen breathed in, carbon dioxide breathed out, plant photosynthesis, breathe out or send out the oxygen. Am I getting this right?
I think you are. So the plants are going to take in that carbon dioxide that the animals or the organisms that are using it breathe out. And as a byproduct, because they transpirate. Oh my goodness sakes. I think we're having a terrible time with this podcast here with all these fancy words. Anyways, plants transpire and they give off oxygen. You can also think about transpiration as, maybe even like sweating.
Oh, yeah.
So when they sweat, because they're also going to give off water vapor when that happens as well.
Yeah, because that's where I was thinking. That kind of reminds me of the water cycle when plants transpire. And by the way, transpire is a verb. That's the action that goes on. Transpiration is a noun, which it describes the activity, so it names it.
All right, so let's put this in some words for you guys here. So the diagrams you saw were the oxygen cycle. And again, I just want to point out that the oxygen cycle does take place alongside with the water cycle and the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle and the rock cycle. It's not like we have one little area that is just for carbon cycle and one little area for nitrogen. It's all the time happening all together. You are just seeing breakdowns so that way you can put it in action in the real world.
So I get what you're saying, Mrs. Forson. So what you're telling me is that I have an oxygen cycle going on that's going on right around me right now. However, that nitrogen cycle is also going on around me too. The water cycle is also going on. So it's all going on together, not by itself. So you don't just have an oxygen cycle. So you don't say, oh, today we're only going to have the oxygen cycle happen. It just all happens all the time. It's like a bunch of wheels turning.
Right.
I like it. Okay.
However, science diagrams lead that into misconceptions.
It does, because I was sitting here thinking about all the diagrams we've been doing, and gosh darn, I would think that they were all separate. And now I get it why some students said, you know what, when I saw the nitrogen cycle diagram, I was confused because I thought it was the water cycle.
Oh, I heard that too. So the oxygen cycle. This is a cycle that goes through ecosystems just like any other cycle, but the oxygen cycle is needed by almost every living organism for cellular processes that are going to release energy. So your cells need it so that way you can live.
I like that. So I would, in my notes, underline cellular processes. Photosynthesis, however, is the primary source of oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. So that's where it comes from. And I believe I was just reading an article about the health of our oceans, and that they believe that a lot of our oxygen that we breathe comes from the algae and the plants that exist in the ocean. So that's why the health of the ocean is really important, and that's why when Mrs. Forson and I talked about earlier when we started these lessons about what happens when you throw off something in the system, an abiotic factor, what happens to the biotic factors. So that kind of ties back to where we started from.
And I want to point out right now that while we said most living organisms need the oxygen for their cellular processes so they can get energy, where do our photosynthetic organisms or our plants get their energy from? So we know that they're going to get their energy from the sun, right?
Oh, right. The sun. That's like the source of all energy. Or the greatest source of all energy, the sun. Okay, so that's why on the diagram we saw a sunny day, sunshine. Okay, I get that. So many living things, including humans, take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. But plants, they take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen.
Well, then that must be a relationship that we have within our ecosystem. It must be one of those vital interactions that we're going to have.
I see. Okay, I see this connection now. So the interaction of carbon and oxygen cycles is one example of a relationship between different types of matter and ecosystems. So as matter cycles through an ecosystem, both the carbon and oxygen take different forms and play a role in the other's element cycle. Oh, now it's all starting to piece together, Mrs. Forson.
Yeah, that's where we're talking about. All these cycles are going to overlap. So each one is going to have an important role in each other's cycles.
So when we were talking about in class, if too much nitrogen gets into the water, those plants, they start growing really fast that are in there. All the life forms grow really fast and die off. So that nitrogen cycle plays a really important part. I'm trying to put this all together in my head. So if something's out of balance, then, do you see where I'm going with this, Ms. Forson? If we're so interconnected, when we throw off the connection,
something's going to happen, like your fish.
Yeah.
What are the fish going to need that those photosynthetic organisms are giving off in the ocean?
Right.
But if they're growing too fast and they are dying, then that means not enough oxygen possibly transpiring out of those plants.
Okay, so if the plants die off, not enough oxygen, fish die off. Wow, that's a lot to think about because I'm thinking about too much nitrogen. So why is it important to go back and consider how much farm fertilizer is going on, and why do we put together programs that educate people on how to manage these things? Because they all interconnect. Wow. Okay, I've really got a lot of things on my mind right now. My head's racing, Mrs. Forson.
So the biggest thing that we want you to take out of this right now is the fact that everything is interconnected and that everything interacts together. So because we're not spinning enough right here with our wheels and our brains and knowing that we have this nitrogen cycle and we have this oxygen cycle, we're going to throw the third cycle onto you right now with cycles of matter, and that's going to be our carbon cycle.
Holy moly, let's take a look at these diagrams. And I can tell you right now, if I took off carbon cycle and I had no words on that, I can guess that people would say, oh, nitrogen cycle. People would say water cycle. They would try to connect it to something else. But let's take a look. Again, let's compare the two. Look at the images and the words and notice what's similar and notice what's different.
And again, Mrs. Skelton, in this pictures of these diagrams, I see the sun, I see some animals in it, I see, some grass,
trees, plants. They're very different, but they're very similar. Oh wait, is that like a factory or a plant, some kind of manufacturing piece, or I'm not sure. It's hard to look at, but yeah.
There's definitely
that's definitely human activity when you see some kind of manufacturing or some kind of plant or some kind of factory. Sometimes I feel like the cows get victimized in these.
I know, those poor
Those
cows.
poor cows. They show up everywhere.
I mean, I don't know why they couldn't pick a chicken or something,
I
but
know.
maybe because chickens aren't big enough.
Oh,
Anyways, we're a little digressing there.
yeah.
However, one thing I want to point out in this picture is compared to the oxygen cycle picture, you know, we kind of get a bad rap as humans and animals that we're the only ones giving off carbon.
Mm.
However, we can see that we're not the only things giving off carbon in these two diagrams. We can see that the factories are giving off carbon. That must mean that burning of fossil fuels again.
Yeah, we were talking about those forest fires in Gatlinburg and how that was probably giving off CO2.
You mean more than nitrogen?
Yeah, and nitrogen and carbon and all of it. So, yeah, we could put a nice little forest fire in there. So we were talking about how that played into the release of carbon into the atmosphere. Wow. So we've got animals giving out carbon, breathing, living organisms factories giving out carbon. So a lot of things going on in there.
Yeah, sure. So let's put these two diagrams into some words for you guys. So like other types of matter, carbon cycles through our ecosystem. So just like nitrogen, carbon can enter the environment when organisms die and decompose. So as we have that dead matter laying on the ground, more than just nitrogen comes out of it. We have carbon that comes out of it as well. And that all is going to return into our soil. It also is going to return into our atmosphere. And some organisms are going to use it and some are not.
Plants seem to like it. I think this is really important because I think we also hear a lot of talk about global warming. And I think if we remember back when we talked about global warming, we brought up a little bit about the CO2 going into the atmosphere, the carbon that's going into the atmosphere.
And unfortunately, it's going into the atmosphere at different rates.
Yeah, from different places. But remember when we talked about how our Earth moved and how all of those trade winds and things moved? Do you remember all of that? When we talked about that before Christmas? Wow, it's moving some of that carbon around too. And we don't think about that. Wow, everything is just really connected together that we're learning in 7th grade science.
It definitely is. And we talked about carbon being found in fossil fuels, which are things such as oil and coal, and burning those. And we know that fossil fuels, they had to be pressurized and they had to be formed when things decompose and they got heated and they had bacteria in there and they were made hundreds of millions of years ago. And unfortunately, as a human species, we're kind of using them up at a pretty quick rate. So we give off a lot of carbon out into the atmosphere.
So it's not a natural way that we're releasing carbon when we use fossil fuels, is what I hear you saying, because in an ecosystem, it's natural for carbon to be released. It's natural for living things to breathe out carbon dioxide. It's natural for plants to die and decompose and animals to die and decompose. And it's natural for that carbon to be released. But when we force the release of carbon, for example, when we burn trees and we burn fossil fuels, then we're forcing a quicker release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Is that what I'm understanding here?
That is what you're understanding. I think about like different ecosystems in this situation. Like here in our ecosystems, which are going to be your forests mainly, maybe a little bit of your polar caps, your tundra area, but not much. It's more your deciduous and your coniferous forests where we live. But I go over to like the savanna, and I go into like the pretty lonesome parts of the savanna, which are your grasslands and all of that. And I think they don't have a lot of burning of fossil fuels. They don't have a lot of factories. They don't have that kind of stuff. So they're definitely getting more of that natural type of carbon cycle over there rather than the enhanced version that we have here. So it makes me think why things don't last over there as long as they do here.
Okay. So what I mean, I'm trying to follow your thought here.
Well, I'm thinking, are there plants more rich in their soil, even though it's more dry?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I don't know.
I just
Wow.
wonder what the effects are on our man-made
Yeah, but
enhancements.
sometimes because we have that man-made enhancement of the release of carbon into the atmosphere, and because we have winds, maybe they can't handle what comes their way too.
Ooh.
Maybe that's why when we have a country or a place that is releasing lots more carbon than they should, than their ecosystem can handle, maybe the earth kind of starts distributing it out.
I think that's a good
Yeah, it's
explanation there.
It's really something to consider because again, we look at ecosystems within ecosystems, and then what's the larger ecosystem of them all, and that's the earth as a whole. So when we're thinking about all of these things, the carbon cycle, the oxygen cycle, the nitrogen cycle, we're talking about abiotic and biotic factors. We're talking about everything that we learned before this, weather and climate, and we start pulling it together, then we have to think of the ecosystem that is the bigger whole, and that's the earth as a whole, I think, and how these things impact it. And I'm sorry, I'm on my little I'm on my little pedestal here. I'm on my preaching thing here. So you have plants and other photosynthetic organisms that take in carbon dioxide and water and produce energy-rich sugars.
And those energy-rich sugars, I just want to remind you, are called glucose. And glucose is just a fancy word for sugar again. And those photosynthetic organisms, they can be found on the surface level of Earth and then deep down into the ocean part, which is still considered surface level of Earth. However, people think because it goes down so far in the waters that it must be going down further into the Earth. But it's not. It's all that surface level. But we just wanted to make sure that we cleared that up a little bit as well.
Oh, sugar. That's a fun thing. We all love some sugar, don't we?
Oh, I love sugar.
I know everybody's asking me all the time to have some of those candy canes left over, a little sugar here. When sugar is broken down by cells and its energy is released, carbon dioxide is released as a byproduct that enters the atmosphere and can be used again. So again, that's part of that carbon cycle there. So that carbon dioxide is released, and guess who takes that back in? The plant.
So it's a natural thing there.
Yeah.
That's what that means, that byproduct. That means that anytime it's releasing it, it's breaking it down, carbon is naturally going to come out.
Right. And again, like you said, that's the natural way that it works. So carbon dioxide is one of those gases in the atmosphere that absorbs thermal energy from the sun and that keeps Earth warm in a process called the greenhouse effect. We're right back to the greenhouse effect, Mrs. Forsythe.
That must be that circle of life thing.
Yeah.
We're going to hear circle of life a lot in this unit of study because everything comes right back full circle around as we were talking in 7th grade science. From different cycles to different products to when we start talking about predator and prey interactions and just animal interactions in itself.
So all of you that have been wondering all this year why we're doing this and this and this in the order in which we're doing them, hey, guess what? It's all starting to come together for you.
Holy moly, we must be geniuses. Or we just know how to do this.
Woo! We know how to do it.
So while the greenhouse effect is essential for life, a steady increase in greenhouse gases can harm our ecosystems.
So let's take a minute and let's look at this diagram a little bit, and let's also think back, and some of you might even want to flip back to your notes on the greenhouse effect. You're looking at how that Earth, and you think about how we learned about the atmosphere and how how that heat is held in there. And remember when you guys were talking about Mars, you realized it was important to have an atmosphere that did hold some heat in, that did make that temperature just right to live. So let's take a second, stop talking.
So I see that solar radiation is going to come in multiple ways within our atmosphere. So it's going to come in, but it also gets trapped by those gases. And those gases are going to let what needs to come in and make it to Earth's surface level get here. And then it's also going to keep out those harmful rays and too much of the gases that we don't need. That's what the beauty of the atmosphere is. That's why you see all those arrows bending each in different way. It's showing you what can be reflected and what can be absorbed by our atmosphere.
Exactly. And if you remember back on your beautiful diagrams that you guys did in your notebooks, you actually took this apart and you looked at the atmosphere and how did it manage the solar radiation that came through. But now we have to think about, what if we are holding in too much heat? What if it becomes effective, the atmosphere becomes effective, that it starts to get things warmer and warmer and warmer?
So that increase there, the increase in those greenhouse gases, what's it going to do? And we know it's going to cause harm. So I go to our polar ice caps, because that is the biggest thing that you're going to hear right now on national television is those polar ice caps are melting and it's causing harm. And it's because we have these greenhouse gases that are increasing in our atmosphere.
And why is that important? Well, you have to consider the polar ice caps themselves. It's a large source of fresh water. It's fresh water. And when we were talking about the water cycle and life, we as human beings and life needs fresh water to live. But when the polar ice caps melt, that water goes into the ocean, and that water in the ocean is not safe to drink. It's salt water. So we can't live on salt water. And we lose the effect of the polar ice caps at reflecting and keeping our temperature just right on Earth.
So those are all major abiotic factors that are going to play this crazy role in this natural phenomena that we just keep talking about. And here, this next week, you're going to start hearing us talk about the biotic factors. So as we increase the abiotic factors, or even as we misuse abiotic factors, we're going to see a huge significant role they're going to play on our biotic factors.
Love it. So thanks for joining Mrs. Forson and myself. We'll see you next time.